I'm not going to use the microphone. You can hear me, yeah? Yeah, I used to teach 7th grade, I work at that volume. And no matter how loud you are, you cannot be louder than 120 13-year-olds. I can guarantee you that. So I think what I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit about the book, and I'll tell you kind of my inspiration for why I wrote it. And then I'll answer any questions that you have. As Jill said, I grew up in a house where books and music really were so important. And I always say the best lesson my parents taught me was never go anywhere without something to read. Because your flight's going to be delayed, and the line at the post office is going to be longer than you think, and you are going to be stuck without something to read. And I have, because I didn't listen to my parents, I have at times actually been reduced to reading the return policy on the back of a receipt. Have you ever been that low? Yeah. So I grew up as a reader. And at some point I figured out that I could do that thing. You know, these stories that I loved to fall into, I could create them. I could take all these daydreams in my head and put them down on paper, and that was all that a writer did. So I always wrote, I was always making up stories. I wrote my first novel in 6th grade, and I really think applying the term novel to it is a little generous. I think it was about 25 pages long. but at the time it felt like a real achievement. When I was in high school, I wrote a lot of really terrible poetry because, you know, I had all these emotions and I didn't know where to put them. And I was just saying to Hannah that I really feel like I think the analogy I used was learning to play the violin. Did any of you have children who were in orchestra when they were little? Or you had to go to a band concert? Someone learning to play an instrument, particularly the violin, is like the worst thing in the world. I think the second worst thing in the world is someone learning to write poetry. And that was me. It was just out of tune. But I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I also knew that wasn't a terribly practical thing to do. So I did a whole lot of other things, which I actually have to say was the best preparation for writing. I was a wedding coordinator. And I can live off the drama that I saw there for the rest of my life. And if I ever do run out, then that's where these 7th graders will pick up, because there is no more drama than in 7th grade. But all the time I was writing, and I wrote short stories, and I wrote essays, and I wrote articles, and I had a few of them published, but I was trying to write novels, because that one in 6th grade just hadn't been enough. And I wrote about 4 or 5 really terrible novels. And I'm in the South, so I know that at least one of you was thinking, oh, bless your heart, I'm sure they weren't that bad. I am here to tell you that they were that bad, and it is really for your protection that I do not release them into the world. But they all taught me something. I think it's that way with any creative art, with cooking or carpentry or anything. When you make something terrible, you learn something out of the process. So when I was about to turn 30, I had sort of, that's a little too early for a midlife crisis, I had a crisis in the way that those big decade birthdays have. You haven't had one yet, but you will. In the way that those big decade birthdays have of kind of coming up and smacking you in the face, I had one of those. And I said to myself, self, this is the year you're going to do it, or you're going to give up the dream forever. And it was actually fortunate, because I had a lot of questions that I needed answers to. And that was really what inspired the writing of The Weird Sisters, was those questions. So I had questions about adulthood. I think when I was younger, I looked at grown-ups, and they looked to me like a separate species. You know, they were confident and knowledgeable, and they always seemed to know what to do in situations. You know, like if I burned myself, my mother knew what to do. And you know, when I was at a fancy wedding, staring at these 7 forks in front of me, you know, the adults at the table would know what to do. So I think I thought that at some point I was going to cross this magical threshold and be sort of imbued with that knowledge. Like Dumbledore was going to show up and present me with adulthood. I don't know about you, but Dumbledore has never shown up. And so there I was, staring down the barrel of 30, and I didn't feel like an adult. Now I know now, because this book has been out for a year and I've talked to a whole lot of other people, I know now that the secret is that nobody feels like a grown-up. That you always just feel like yourself inside. And yourself may have children and mortgages and retirement funds, but you just still feel like yourself. Another one of the questions I had was about family roles. So I come from a family of 3 sisters. I'm the youngest. And I always say that 3 siblings of the same gender is the perfect pressure cooker for birth order roles to come out. Are you guys familiar with birth order theory? So the idea that the person you become, it depends on where you were born in your family. So when my sisters and I were younger, we were very much stereotypical birth order. My oldest sister was this really driven, successful, slightly bossy, but maternal and loving person. My middle sister was a stereotypical middle. She was very social, very charming, voted best friend in her high school yearbook, but always sure that she was being forgotten about. You know, sure that my oldest sister and I had more pictures in the family album than she did, and sure that we were getting a bigger piece of cake than she was. And then there was the youngest child, me, and of course youngest children are all beautiful and brilliant. And so I was like a performer. I was interested in theater. I was really outgoing, but I was also, well, I will just admit it, I was spoiled. And I was used to kind of being taken care of. I was used to people, things just worked out because people took care of me. Now, when we grew up, those traits really blurred. I became a teacher, and you do not wrangle 127th graders by being sort of like the free spirit. And so I developed this, you know, sort of organized type A streak in me. But when I go back to my parents' house, especially if my sisters are there, we are all 7 again. And I am not allowed to be in charge of anything. I cannot convert oxygen into carbon dioxide without specific instructions from my older siblings on how to do it. And I could feel it happening when I walked into their house, but I couldn't stop it. And that drove me bonkers. So that was something else I was wondering about. I was wondering about the meaning of success and failure, because I think I thought that there were certain things that I was supposed to have accomplished by the time I turned 30, and I felt like a failure because I hadn't, and yet other people had managed to. So I was constantly comparing myself to other people. And I felt kind of like a fraud. I thought that at some point, you know, someone was going to pull back the mask and I was going to be revealed. I don't know what I thought. I mean, there was nothing to reveal. But I felt like people were going to find out that I wasn't who they thought I was. So I had a lot of questions like that. And I described the process of writing a novel as dragging a magnet over a table full of paper clips. I don't know why you would do that, but just go with it. And when you get to the end, all the paper clips stuck to the magnet are your novel. So one of my paper clips was birth order, and one of them was adulthood, and one of them was success and failure. Another one was the way that families communicate, because I think every family has their own language. And if you go to someone else's house for dinner, you will sit there and not understand half of the conversation, because they've got nicknames for each other, and they're quoting books and movies that are important to them. At my parents' house, Broadway song lyrics are very important, so if you are invited to dinner, brush up before you go, because there will be a quiz. And words, like very often, I think this is so interesting, if one of your kids mispronounces a word when they're little, that word becomes the thing. So in my house it's ambulance, which is an ambulance, and it is still, right? We are all well above childhood now, and it is still an ambulance. So that was another paperclip, the way the families communicate. And I just realized I never told you what the book was about. Maybe I should do that. All right, hang on a second. Another one was Shakespeare, which was kind of the way I got at family communication. Another one was my love of reading. So I took that and I put it into what became The Weird Sisters. And The Weird Sisters is the story of 3 adult daughters of a renowned Shakespeare professor who come home to the small college town where they grew up one summer, partially because their mother is ill, but mostly because they have kind of screwed up their lives and are not really sure what to do next. And that makes it sound really depressing, but I swear to you, it is not as depressing as it sounds. So that was kind of how I came to write the book.